Hey, and welcome back to the Maybe I Can podcast. I'm your host, Debbie Weiss, and I am so happy to chat with you today because last night I just got back from a wonderful 2-week vacation with two of my cousins, taking a cruise to different places in Europe. It started in Venice, ended in Barcelona, and we went to Montenegro, Croatia, several stops in Italy, a couple of stops in France where we saw the lavender fields, and then one day we went to Monaco and Monte Carlo. It was incredible, and I'm so grateful that I was able to take that trip with my cousins and actually taking a break from everything for 2 weeks. That ability to disconnect, and the only thing that you're thinking about is where you have to go today, what should you wear, or where will we be eating, all of those kind of things. It's really nice. But I have to say, I am very happy to be here today talking to you because I miss our conversations. And today we are going to be talking about a sprinkle of compassion. And when I first started thinking about this episode, I thought to myself, well, isn't it pretty obvious? I just assumed that it would be about being kinder to other people. But then I realized something. It's that some of the people I've had the least compassion for over the years included myself, the people I loved the most, and even people whose experiences were just different than mine. Meaning compassion isn't just about being nicer or kinder. If we're being honest about it, it really is about choosing understanding. I find that difficult, and I have difficulty with all three of these things. So let's start with compassion towards ourselves. That means, what are we telling ourselves? How are we speaking to ourselves? What stories do we tell ourselves? And then also, what grace do we extend to ourselves? So on this vacation, that was amazing, and we made wonderful memories, even though it was like a record heat wave in all of Europe. And that made it a little less enjoyable being out there in what felt like 100 degrees in the blazing sun. However, it was still fantastic. But even so, there were moments where unexpectedly I felt sad. I think that would happen when I saw my cousins either calling or texting their husbands. And even if it wasn't, because it usually isn't, oh my goodness, I miss him so much. Actually, spoiler alert, it was never that. But it was just that idea of they had to check in with someone. And maybe sometimes they found it annoying, but I didn't. I just would think to myself, oh, poor me. I don't have a husband or a significant other to check in with. When we were going home, one of their husbands was picking them up, and I just, again, felt sorry for myself. I mean, I paid for a driver to come get me, and that's very different than having your spouse come pick you up and be happy to see you after a couple of weeks. Besides these feelings, I've mentioned to you before, I've got all this physical stuff going on. So I had some discomfort that I really tried to manage over the vacation. And I did a pretty good job. And I almost had wanted to cancel. And if you were listening to a previous episode, I talked about that. And then I decided, you know what, let me give it a try. And I'm glad that I did. But because of that pain, I think it just magnified everything that I was feeling. And then I stopped and eventually noticed my thoughts. Now, I got to tell you, this was not, oh, look at the way I'm thinking. Let me notice that. I wish it was. That's what I'm working towards, is the constant awareness of the stories that we're telling ourselves. It took me quite some time. I mean, it could have taken me most of the cruise to stop and have that awareness of what story am I actually telling myself and really questioning what is really true here. One of the greatest acts of self-compassion is learning to separate these facts from the stories that we create. For example, in my own life, I miss Gary. That is a fact. But the story maybe that I was telling myself is that my life will always be lonely. That's just a story. If I gained weight, which actually I know that I did on vacation, I was afraid to step on the scale. The fact is that I've gained weight. The story I tell myself is I failed. I failed. What's wrong with me? Why did I have to eat that? Why did I grab those extra snacks of peanut M&Ms, my favorite candy, that happened to be in our cabin through the whole time? I failed. That's just a story I tell myself. When you have a bad day, the fact is, I had a bad day. But instead, a lot of times we catastrophize it. The story we tell ourselves is nothing will ever get better, and we often don't suffer because of the facts. We are really suffering because of the story we build around these facts. The hardest part is being aware that we're telling ourselves a story. So whenever you're upset, I want you to ask yourself, what actually happened here? And what story am I telling myself? Is there another story that might also be true? This isn't denying reality. It's just refusing to let one painful moment really define yourself. And when we do, this is treating ourselves with compassion. That awareness of these terrible things that we tell ourselves, that my life stinks, or I will always be lonely, or why can't I lose weight, and I'm lazy and I have no willpower, and all the things. What are we doing? I mean, gosh, I do it all the time to myself. And I hear it in my children, and I tell them, but quite honestly, they roll their eyes usually and think that it's one other piece of advice or nonsense that I spew. Someday they'll get it. I think about things that my parents told me decades ago that I rolled my eyes at, and now I remember it and I say, oh, now I get it. So I'm going to just keep planting that seed in conversation with them, knowing that one day it'll make sense. All right, let's move on to the second type of compassion, which is compassion towards the people that we love. Now, I know I've told this story in different ways, but I think it's important to reiterate it here. My story of compassion towards people I love, there's so many examples, but I think the biggest one is with my husband, Gary, because this is where I struggled the most. For so many years, and at this point, I did not really understand to know that Gary had clinical depression and anxiety. And for years, I would try and get him to see doctors, not just for his depression and anxiety, by the way. He had so many other physical problems that really all seemed to start after he turned 50 and just, one thing just kept leading to another. And he did not take good care of himself physically. He, just like me, also suffered for a long time with his weight. I mean, his whole life, really. He was a smoker and a pretty heavy smoker for most of his life. Never really interested in quitting. He didn't do any exercise. He never wanted to see a therapist. He just, in my eyes, didn't do anything to help himself. I would always be scheduling doctor's appointments and then he wouldn't show up. Or He wouldn't take a test that they would recommend. And I kept searching for the answers. And I believe that if me, found the right answer, that somehow I could make him better. Every little thing I would say, oh, he was also diabetic. If once his sugar gets under control, then everything else should fall back into place. And it never seemed to happen. And it became exhausting. And I was frustrated. Oh my goodness, so frustrated and resentful that here I am trying to help you. And all you give me is basically grief. And I think that admitting this is tough. Because if I am completely honest, after a while of this, I started losing compassion. That doesn't mean I stopped loving him. It means that I became emotionally exhausted. And then what came next? The guilt. What kind of wife feels this way? I see how much he's suffering, and yet I'm resentful. And then he received a terminal cancer diagnosis. And after a few weeks, he really tried, but after a few weeks, his depression and anxiety just became worse. And they continued to become worse and worse as time went on. And sometimes he was angry. And that grew into most times he was angry. But he was angry with me because I think he felt that I wasn't being compassionate. And in my mind, I kept trying to take him places and help him with his pills and all the things. And that was my way. And he didn't like it or appreciate it. And he was sometimes mean. And when someone receives a terminal diagnosis, and I don't know, thank goodness I don't know what this feels like. But I also was kind of angry that he didn't understand that my kids and I, we were grieving too. And I wanted him to see our pain and to understand that. But he couldn't. And I just became angry. And I then became guilty for being angry. As a matter of fact, the day before he died, early in the morning, it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, he was sleeping he'd been sleeping for a year downstairs. Actually, in this room that I'm recording, I had turned this into a bedroom, and he something in him must have known it was close to the end, because he told me that he didn't want to be by himself. And so I took a blow-up mattress, and the room next to this is my family room, and I slept in there for about the last 7 to 10 days of his life. And this one particular morning, again, the day before he died at 6 in the morning, he had to go to the bathroom, and he couldn't even walk. I can't even explain it. And he got to the bathroom, and he couldn't turn himself around to face the toilet, and he wound up falling down, or I kind of gently placed him down because I couldn't carry his dead weight. And I tried to get him up. I woke up Ben, and he couldn't get him up, and I call 911, and they come, and they get him up very quickly, and they take his vitals and everything, and they said, "Sir, you need to come to the hospital. There's this happening." And he was, oh my goodness, he was not having it. And one of the EMTs was saying, "Sir, I'm telling you, if you don't come now, later on today, we're going to be back here, and your wife can't handle it." And she was kind of lecturing him, trying to convince him to go in the ambulance. And he got angry at her and told them basically to leave, which they did. About 3 hours later, he couldn't breathe. And he said, "Please call." And I did. And then I laugh, and this is going to come out so mean, but it kind of really was a culmination of everything in our relationship over the last many years. So he had anxiety, but he also had some OCD, and I knew that there were certain crazy things to me that he wanted when we went to the hospital. And so while we were waiting, I was going around and like preparing and getting all his stuff in a bag. And then he called me and he said, help me get dressed. And I said, I don't think, what's the point of getting dressed? You know, you're just going to get undressed. And he was really struggling to breathe. But he wanted it, so I did it. And then he said to me, what the heck is taking them so long? Now, remember, it was only 4 or 5 hours earlier that the woman wanted him to get in the darn ambulance. And the fact that now he was questioning, and I said to him, seriously, I can't believe you're even asking this right now. And he said to me, seriously, I can't believe that you're even talking to me like this right now. And I remember just saying, good point. And he asked me if I was coming, which I thought was a strange question. And of course, I told him that I was. If you've read my books or listened to past podcasts, on the way in the ambulance, they had to pull over because he needed to be intubated. And then the next morning, it was basically over, and I had to make the decision to turn off the machine. So that was our last conversation. And I did, and it's still difficult for me not to feel that I was not compassionate enough. Really a difficult thing. Here's the thing. One of the biggest myths I think about compassion is that compassionate people always feel compassionate. They don't. I am compassionate, but I certainly have moments where I am not compassionate. Compassion ebbs and flows, especially when you're exhausted, when you've been trying or doing this for years, when you feel invisible, like they're not seeing you. That doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're a bad caregiver. It just honestly means you're human. Fast forward to today, while I was on vacation, I received a text from my brother that he lost his job. Now, my brother's almost 59 years old. He's a grown man with 5 grandchildren. And he knows how to take care of himself. But immediately, my brain goes into problem solving. Not how is he feeling, but how can I help him financially? Because luckily, I've been able to do that in the past. But I've done that, and I've sometimes put myself in difficult financial situations because I couldn't bear watching him struggle. And I notice that I do this with everyone that I love. So it's not just about my brother. I do it with my kids. I did it with Gary, with my father. I've done this my whole life. This is one of the biggest lessons that I am still learning. And here's what it is. Compassion is not responsibility. For years, I believed if I love someone, I should try to fix their problems. I should protect you. I should make it better. And now I am still in the process of learning that compassion just says, I'm here. Responsibility says, I have to solve this. And they are not the same things. I ask myself, am I trying to relieve their suffering or my discomfort watching them suffer? And that's a whole mouthful, but if you have kids, just think about it. It is so incredibly painful to watch them suffer. And I remember when I was little and I was going through something, I don't even remember what it was. And my father said to me, oh, I wish I could be the one to do that for you. Meaning, let me experience the pain. That would be so much better for me than watching you suffer. Another story about being compassionate towards others is when my mom, who lives in Florida, I'm in New Jersey, she made the difficult decision to sell her house that she had lived in with my stepfather. I think at that time, maybe it had been approximately 5 years since my stepfather had passed away, and she was living in the house by herself. And she finally made the decision to move into an independent living facility. Took her a long time. And honestly, I was trying to convince her that was the right decision because it seemed so logical to me. I mean, it was stressful for her with all of the maintenance. Something was always breaking or bells going off. She was in this house by herself when big hurricanes hit the area, and I was talking to her on the phone, trying to be there for her as she was in an interior bathroom just in case her whole house was destroyed. And there she is by herself, 80 years old, in the bathroom. It was ridiculous to me. I mean, it was so logical. What are you doing? Get out of this. This is financially a burden. It's in every way a burden to you. And to me, it was logical. And my mother knew that, but she was living the emotion of it. She was grieving, giving up her home, her memories that she had there, her independence. Even though she still is independent, she's not as independent as she was because she's beholden to the facility, has a chef, and so there's 3 meals a day there, and there's luckily someone she can call when something goes wrong and all the things, but she, I think, feels like she lost a bit of her independence. And I remember her also saying to me something like, well, this'll be the last place I live. Man, that hit me hard. And she was grieving another chapter in her life ending. She didn't need me convincing her logically why it made sense. She just needed understanding and compassion. Sometimes the most compassionate thing we can do is in solving someone's problems. It isn't to convince them or rescue them. It's simply to sit beside them and acknowledge this is hard. I mean, it's a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. So when someone you love is hurting, I want you to ask yourself, did they ask me to fix this? What do they really need most right now? Am I listening or am I immediately trying to solve? Remember, think of a backpack that everybody's carrying a backpack, and it's filled with grief and fears and responsibilities and disappointments. Compassion walks beside someone carrying their backpack. It doesn't automatically take their backpack away. And this is one of the hardest lessons that I've learned, is I cannot want someone's healing more than they do. All right, moving on to the third type of compassion, which is towards people whose experiences differ from ours. So when my father died, one of my very close friends didn't come to the funeral. And that's not like her. She is the person who shows up, who does the right thing, who's always sending. And she didn't show up because she had a business meeting that she was running, which was important. But you know what? How often does someone's father die? One time. Her father at that point was alive. And I was just so hurt that she didn't come. She came afterwards and paid her respects and brought me food and all the things. She did all of that. But not having her at the funeral, not in my mind feeling that she didn't prioritize our friendship over business needs was really hurtful. Years later, another friend of mine loses her father, and she is truly distraught. That's absolutely not true. But I don't know. When I was a little girl, I certainly idolized my father just because of life experience. That idolization, is that a word? It got tainted and it changed. But she, I believe, continued to idolize her father. And after he died, oh, she missed him terribly. And 3 years later, she could still cry at the drop of a hat or a mention of his name. Let's just say 2 or 3 years after her dad died is when Gary, my husband, died. And just months later, she's still telling me stories about her father. And if I'm being honest, in my own mind, I was comparing my grief to hers. Like thinking to myself, you lost your father a couple of years ago, and no offense, it's your father. He's 80 something years old. I am not saying that's easy. Absolutely not. But I've lost my father, and now I've lost my husband, and they're very different experiences. And now I realize that I was comparing my grief to hers. And my own grief made it difficult to fully make room for her grief. Instead, I was comparing it. Pain isn't a competition. Loss isn't a competition, right? Everyone experiences suffering differently for a different amount of time in different ways. And compassion says, what might this mean to them? Instead of questioning, why are they even reacting like this? That's the judgment piece, right? Here's where I'm judging them for their reaction. I think that they're overreacting. So instead, maybe ask myself, what might I not know? I might not know everything. So 3 different places that we need to be compassionate. And for each one, let's think of one question that you should ask yourself. So when we talk about compassion towards ourselves, I think the most important thing to say to yourself is, what story am I telling myself? And separate the fact from the story. When it comes to compassion towards someone you love, ask yourself, am I trying to support them or solve their problem? And when it's compassion towards someone who's just different than you, what might I not understand about their experiences? This week, I want you to catch yourself just once. Catch yourself one time when you notice yourself judging, whether it's yourself, someone you love, or maybe even a stranger. Pause, notice it, take a breath, and then ask yourself, what else might be true? That one question has the power to soften your heart before you react. So, in closing, when I started thinking about compassion, I thought it was something we gave away to other people. What I've learned is that compassion changes every relationship in our lives. It changes how we see ourselves. It changes how we love the people closest to us. And it changes how we move through a world where everyone is carrying something that we may never fully understand. Maybe compassion isn't about fixing, rescuing, or always having the right words. Maybe it's about choosing understanding over judgment, one conversation, one thought, and one small sprinkle at a time. Because when we soften the way we see ourselves and others, we don't just change our relationships, we change the way we experience life. Don't forget it. Don't forget something else. I want to know. I want to hear from you. I just heard a story from someone who said that she was talking to someone who had listened to all the podcasts and loved it and really related to it. And I hadn't heard from her. I want to hear from you. I want to know how this relates to you. I want to know what you want to hear about. I want to know what you don't like. I want to know it all because this podcast is for you. And me too, because I love talking to you. All right, I'm going to end it there. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week.